Dan Gillespie from up at Meadow Grove, northeast part of the state. Continuous no-till, 26 years coming this year. Been playing with cover crops since 2004. Ties in with what Keith was saying. I started using cover crops for erosion control, 04 through 06, some brutal, intense rainstorms, corn bean rotation, no livestock. Thought I had continuous no-till, the perfect system. Soil biology increases, soybean residue, low carbon nitrogen ratio goes away fast. I didn't have the erosion control, didn't have the residue to cover my soil and prevent that damaging impact to the raindrop. So we went to cover crops, and the erosion control goes away when you start augmenting that soybean residue with the cereal rye, which was the animal that I chose because it's so aggressive, grows on both sides of January. So I'm going to keep moving here. Let's see. Okay, John Fry. I got to make sure I've got this right here. Pointer. Okay, April 26th of 16, planting green into soybean ground. That field had a wind event, 10% green snap, 235 bushel an acre, he told me yesterday. He's got toolbar level. Wait a minute. Those two buttons are way too close together. Toolbar height, cereal rye, planting green into it. A little pop-up fertilizer, some 721-7, 10 gallons of a mix of 32 and thiosol dribbling behind the planter. So what he's doing is he's addressing that nitrogen immobilization thing right away. He's adding some nitrogen to that system to help biodegrade, to cycle that rye. Okay, just quickly, planting green, really it's about maximizing capture of sunlight and rainfall, two things that we have no control over. Okay, just quickly, you know, everything goes back to this process right here. This is the first trophic level, and the living roots in the soil have become, you know, that's the point of the whole cover crop thing. Augment that growing season on either side of your cash crop. I like to focus on the bacteria, protozoa, fungi. Those are the animals down there that really, I think, are representative of the soil health improvement and the biology that we need to get to keep going. This is John's same field. This is June 11th. Yes, it does look ugly for a while, but you know, ugly is beautiful. Okay. June 22nd. And that looks good. Now, you talk about weed suppression. Rodrigo was talking about that. My cover crops, cereal rye is the main animal that I use, like I said. I'm trying to get some legumes in there and following the beans. But if you're looking for weed suppression, if you've got some resistant weeds, this is what you're going to be looking at trying to get out there to have that aspect of your IPM out there. This is how I would grow my rye cover crop every year if I could. But the whole thing I referred to earlier about planting green is managing sunlight and rainfall. Okay, so we can get all the rainfall incorporated that we want, that everything that falls we can get into the ground. But the whole idea of planting green comes down to managing your soil moisture. The whole management aspect of planting green comes down to be aware of what you've got in the ground, aware of your springtime climate, aware of the forecast, and be prepared. I would say have your own sprayer to terminate when you need to. Spring 2016 was an eastern corn belt spring for us, 6.6 inches above normal precip, 7.5 from the 18th of April through the 11th of May. April 11th, this last spring of 16, I was considering termination at about 8 inches because it was so dry. And then the weather forecast changed. So, you know, how does that, I kind of took a leap of faith there and didn't terminate it. And then I get into a very heavy rainfall spring, and keeping the cover crop out there was a benefit for me. 2014, planted green, terminated May 10th. I would have gone longer, but for a dry forecast. We ended up with 40 hundredths of rain on the 14th. It was the only rain in May, had a wonderful stand of corn. In the background, you see the end gun there. The neighbor disced his field up. It's a bottomland, just like we're looking at here, to dry it out so he could plant it. Now, with the weather forecast turning dry, he's irrigating to bring his crop up. I'll dry the ground out. I'll take the wet out of that cold and wet with my rye cover crop or whatever mix you have out there, and build some organic matter while I'm doing it. This is the little magic out there. This is the mycorrhizal fungi. And I'm going to take it for granted that you guys have seen, guys, ladies and gentlemen, have seen enough of the soil biology to know that this is what we're talking about. This is the magic in the soil. You know, seeing something like this, a glob of that is very rare, but it's the point of planting green. I call it the microbridge. So when you plant green, you've got that living mycorrhizal fungal system out there. And the minute that seedling germinates, those hyphae networks are colonizing that plant root and colonizing the plant cells in that plant root. So when they're colonized by the beneficial mycorrhizal fungi, there's no room for the pathogenic fungi to join the party. So this spring, I drilled my beans April 25th into cereal rye that was probably about 8 to 10 inches tall. It was drilled after the corn last year, so it's kind of a dormant planting, got a slow start. But the beauty of that, especially in the soybean leg, is that you can let them both grow as long as you're aware of how much moisture you're going to use. If you're irrigated, not an issue, but in dry land, it's trickier. But again, I'm trying to grow that rye cover crop as much as I can. Okay, planting green. Now this isn't really green. This is me in 2016. The same day I was drilling my beans, the neighbor was terminating the rye. This stuff was getting to the point where on April 25th, it was heading out. It was lodging in some places. It was so big, so I had him spray it. I was planting my beans, and then it turned rainy, so I didn't get back to plant this until May 5th. You can see it's still pretty green for being 10 days into that termination, but as much moisture as we had in the soil profile this spring, it's not going to bother me for that rye to die slowly, as long as it dies. This is the beauty of that green living root. My agronomist, actually, Brian's here. He remember that day you showed up in the tractor cab or the field out there, and I'm driving along planting, and you jump in the tractor cab, and we were both kind of quiet for a little bit, and then pretty soon Brian said, "Pretty wet out there." And then Dan waited a little bit and looked at him and said, "Are you telling me to stop?" And Brian said, "No." It worked out just fine with that massive roots in there. I had one of the best stands I've ever had. But this is what's beautiful. Look at the aggregation. Look at the color. This is down in that heavy cover crop growth area in the bottom. Earthworms. I also put a pop-up fertilizer down, 5 gallons of 1034-0. I was getting fancy and adding zinc and all that silly stuff until Ray told me it was stupid. So I just went to 5 gallons of 1034-0. Don't even know if I'm going to need that anymore. If I've got that kind of a population of earthworms and the quality of the castings that are coming out the back end of them, maybe I don't need to do starter anymore. But this is the beauty of that system. Okay, this is the other end here. This stuff was 3 feet tall and lodged. And actually, I should refer back to last year at this time. There were some farmers here presenting that were planting into rye this tall. So what I'm talking about is not so challenging here. But again, I'll maximize the growth of that cover crop every time I can. It all comes down to soil moisture use. Okay. This is the kind of residue we want out there for a little bit of weed suppression, and mare's tail just turns tail and runs. It does have a positive effect on water hemp, but you got to have a canopy like this. The other part I'm talking about with growing your planting green and growing both of those, you know, the cover crop and the cash crop, that's the key, is overlapping the growth of those two, utilizing that moisture, but overlapping the growth of the cash crop and the cover crop allows you to stretch that cover crop growth just enough to get enough value out of it, in this corn bean rotation that it might work. Okay, I'm enthusiastic about that. Okay, just quickly, if you're in dry land, May 17th, 2012, 4:30 in the afternoon, 95 degrees, 25-mile-an-hour wind. I grabbed a hygrometer, went out, stuck it underneath that canopy to see what my seedling environment was like. 30+% relative humidity down there, better than the alternate. I took the hygrometer over to a Thurman sand field right next to me, dry land, put it on bare soil, and it pegged down. Okay, Ray told me he's going to talk about this a little too, but here's what I'm talking about. Polyasses finally got me planting deep enough that you don't see many of those last roots, the brace roots showing up there. So plant deep when you're planting green, a better environment, a more uniform environment, moisture-wise and temperature-wise. But this is what I like. Now, here, July 20th, we've got all that residue in contact with the biologically active surface. There's a lot of lignin, a lot of carbon in there. And this is, well, this is photosynthesis. This is what the plants do. We're harvesting sunlight, the stomata on the underside of the leaf open to gather in this carbon dioxide that's being cycled. And as they're gathering CO2, there's water vapor release. So that's your transpiration losses there. So if this is a carbon-rich environment now, the stomata stay open a shorter amount of time, lose less water vapor, and there's where this plays into your irrigation water management, your water use efficiency with a healthy cover crop. So that's the benefit there. The corn comes out, get the drill out, stick it in the ground. I don't care if it's October 5th or if it's December 25th. If you can get out in the field, get the rye in there. If you have to run the pivot, use some of the water you saved through the year to get it up and running. Okay? The beauty of it is, this is all you need to get. You don't even need to get germination because it can germinate over the fall, winter, spring. It'll be growing out there. Plant your beans. Let them both grow as long as you feel you have the soil moisture to do it, and terminate at your pleasure. So here you are. Planting green, here I am, 425-16. Got it planted 425, and we had 5.4 inches of rain between now and May 10th. Also, 6 nights where it was under 35 degrees temperature. The cereal rye, in my opinion, is taking the wet out of the cold and wet. The mycorrhizal fungi are colonizing the plant roots, galvanizing them against some of those pathogens, and no seed treatment. I didn't mention I don't use seed treatments anymore. UNL and your soybean management field days, I think this year you said for 16 years now you've been saying no seed treatments. And I think one of the keys to galvanizing that decision and getting away with it is to have that growing cover crop out there. Beans come up easy. I love this slide because you leave all that residue on the ground, you put the growing living roots in the soil, and you can't even move a piece of residue to look for a seedling without finding an earthworm, and they are a great indicator. The beans germinate and do fine underneath there. We're terminated here, starting to die. I think, Rodrigo, very interesting some of your research and what I'm seeing out there in the field. The beans seem to do all right. One thing they do is elongate a little further before they set that first node. So my old auger head, bean head gets underneath there. It minimizes field losses. I like that. The beans do just fine. Rodrigo, I think there's a difference between a residue that's somewhat desiccated and vertical in structure versus a growing weed leaf competing there. There must be something with that. Here's again then, July 17th, my bean field finally canopies. I'm the last one in the field to have a nice, or last one in the neighborhood to have a nice green field. But underneath here, just like I was showing you with the corn situation, we've got all this carbon underneath that environment that's cycling, right when the plant needs to uptake a lot of it. Here's that elongated soybean plant structure. It's about 4 inches tall. I had to dig around to find a place where I could find 2 seeds per square foot. So that's just an advantage. You maybe save a bushel, bushel and a half of field loss out there. That pays for a little bit of cover crop. Not buying seed treatments anymore. There's some more money to spend on a cover crop. Let Mother Nature do it. Beans come out. This year I've got a little cereal rye, balanza clover, hairy vetch out there. Some of Rodrigo's slides were encouraging. Maybe I use a lower rate of glyphosate. I've got 105-day corn purchase so I can wait until the clover and vetch get a little growth on them and maybe can withstand that application of glyphosate. So this is in the corn next year. In the beans next year, I'm kind of excited about one thing. I think last year I mentioned, I was on the panel here, I mentioned that there was a gentleman in Iowa who did a one pass on his beans. And I read about that. I can't locate it, but here's what I'm thinking. If moisture conditions allow me, if everything works out right, I'm depending on Mother Nature, but I'm thinking grow my cover crop to boot stage if I can, and have that nice dense canopy out there as my weed control, just like a wheat crop out there. Okay, coming in with clethodim, Select Assure, something like that, which kills the Roundup Ready corn, volunteer corn, and will kill the rye, and may have some residual because the label says you can't plant corn after that for 6 weeks. So we're going to come in with clethodim, some Select to clean up whatever, or not Select, some Cadet to clean up whatever broadleaves, water hemp, whatever may be emerging. There's no water hemp there because of the rye already. And then put a little acetochlor, a product called Warren, a neighbor kid used, and it had just a beautiful looking field. But a one pass on beans into a cover crop. I think it can be done. I'm going to do it if conditions turn out right. That'll be beautiful. There's some more savings that you can ramp back into the cover crop end of it. So how am I doing for time? Okay, for time? I think so. Okay, so the benefit, early in the talk, I talked about erosion control and how that was my goal. And it should be every goal. And it works. You throw that continuous cover crop behind corn, behind beans, on top of a continuous no-till system. First thing that goes away is your ephemeral gully problems. I haven't been out there messing around with flow areas in a field before I've planted for a long, long time. And that's closely associated with the implementation of the cover crops on top of that. So that you get the erosion control out of the picture, then you start building soil, right? Well, here we have, this is a study done by the Lower Elkhorn NRD up there when we had a no-till incentive program. We took 4 farms. This is a long-term continuous no-till farm. I've been continuous since 1991. We did this. We did one that got into their no-till program, and one that was conventional. We sampled by soil types. We did a 0 to 2, 0 to 8. We wanted to see what was going on in that rhizosphere, upper 2 inches, the most active part of the soil where everything with soil organic matter builds up faster than the normal 0 to 8 soil testing profile. So you can see back in 1999, after 8 years of continuous no-till, I still was building back from some pretty low numbers, okay? So through this whole time frame, we've missed 2004 and 2010 because weather conditions closed us off and we couldn't sample at the same time that we usually do, okay? So here we are, continuous no-till until about 04 to 06, I mentioned, was when we had those devastating rain events, and I added the cover crop to it. So it's just continuous no-till here. Well, let's look at the 0 to 8. We're bumping along there around, 2, 2.1, 2.3, 2.3. So that 0.1% per year that they say, is an average gain with a continuous no-till system. One anomaly year must have been a testing thing or something. So, you throw that out. There's a few other anomaly years in here that can only be represented by a long-term graph. But I just want to show you 06, 04 is when I started playing with it. 06 is when I went to cover crops in the soybean fields every year. So it was corn, beans, cover crop after beans. So you see here in 06 how things, the soil maps or the soil tests start to change pretty rapidly. You can see the range 2.1 to 2.3. You can see the range, 3.4 to 3.2. And we get to 2014 when I decided, okay, it's going to be continuous cover crops. We're going to plug that gap where there's no living roots. And you see the numbers even go up a little bit more. So we're looking at, across the field, 3.5 to 4.5% organic matter. The slide I showed you with the earthworms and the rye root ball, I'm sure that stuff is up there around 5, probably even higher. Okay, so the only way you can represent that is with a graph. The 0 to 8 is the lighter one. So here we are bouncing around down here with that anomaly year. You get to year 7, 2006, and start adding after the soybean ground, and it does a little bit better. You get to 14, and it just keeps climbing. So the whole thing with the cover crop, the roots, and all that, some of my friends in Extension I've talked with, and he questions whether that's a real organic matter or not, whether it's recalcitrant. Well, that's the point of having the cover crops out there every year. Feed the system every year. Feed the system constantly. You don't have to worry if it's a recalcitrant organic matter or not. You know what? I missed one thing. The pH is seeming to buffer a little bit too. Buffers a little down from the upside, and it seems like it buffers a little up from the downside. Okay, so the connection between the living roots and the soil biology. And I had that slide earlier where I pointed out the bacteria, the protozoa, and the fungi. Those are, to me, looking at it as a farmer, I'm going, those are the guys that count for me. Okay, they're down there in the first, second, third trophic levels. Okay, so March 23rd of 2016, this farm is in a CIG grant. It's one of my mother's farms. Mary, Mike, that group, all they're sampling, I think for how many more years do we do that, Mike? A few more? Are we done? Okay, I'm going to have to do that myself. But anyway, March 23rd, a rye cover crop on 15-inch rows, maybe 4, 6 inches tall. That's all that's growing out there for cover crop. And a PLFA test of almost 5,000. Functional group diversity index test, 1.6. Those are both, above excellent or even maybe 20% higher. Bacteria, fungi, protozoa numbers, good, okay? So the same place, the same part of the field this fall or last fall where I'm doing the Haney test for a CSP contract. It's after beans. The cover crop's planted at this point, but it's not growing. The cover crop was planted about the 12th. So it's planted, there's no living roots in the soil, and the same test is about half on the total living microbial biomass. The functional group diversity index, I tend to simplify things to what I think counts. The diversity is still there. We just don't have the living roots to support the biology. So I think that is another aspect of the planting green, the Michael bridge, the whole idea of keeping those living roots in the soil as much as possible. To address the federal crop insurance, I think, I'm comfortable with the management. Here we are, we're zone 3, okay? And it says terminate cover crop at or before planting the crop. Well, that's not what I'm talking to you guys about. But we've got some additional termination considerations. Here, number 3, if the cover crop's part of a no-till system, termination can be delayed up to 7 days from the above termination period guideline. So you've already got, in my loose interpretation, 7 days from planting the crop. So you can go farther than that before you go termination. Number 1, if the season is drier than normal, nearing the termination time, consider an earlier termination. That just makes sense. That's monitoring your soil moisture profile. But number 2, if the spring season is wetter than normal, consider a later termination. In my mind, that opens the door or opens it up for us to make those management decisions. But that management is going to be really key because cereal rye in a short period of time can use a lot of moisture, especially when it gets to boot. Okay? I would suggest you either have a very good relationship with your co-op guy or your own sprayer. If you're going to plant green and manage that way. And I think that is it. I got time for a couple of questions. Oh, perfect. Look at that, Kalyasa. Have you ever done that?
Anybody have a question for Dan or Rodrigo?
Yeah. Well, sure. Yeah. I mean, you know, with the way this spring's opening up, you may be able to get out there in the next couple of weeks and get something out there. But the beauty of it is, you know, if I was going to plant something in the spring, I'd choose something cheaper if oats would be cheaper. But if you've got that rye sitting around and you don't want it to sit around another year and lose germination, get it out there as soon as possible. Let them both grow. You can do this green planting thing, manage your moisture. If it's under irrigation, you can go to boot stage. You know, I don't know if you noticed, but some of those pictures, there were heads in some of that rye cover crop. I went a long time. I didn't terminate till May 19th. So if what?
If the rye does not fertilize, it will not head, but it'll grow.
Right.
Still got green.
Yeah. Did you catch that? Ray said if the rye doesn't vernalize, if it doesn't go through a freeze cycle, it won't head. So you're just going to have a nice green cover crop. Now, I did have a slide showing how tall I like to grow that cover crop. On the bottom side of that, I wouldn't consider termination before 8 inches at all. Because there, you know, it's not using that much moisture. Unless you're really dry, 8 inches would be the limit. When it gets to 8, 10, 12, that's when it gets really aggressive. But you know, there's a tremendous value in soil biology and root structure and soil structure at 4 inches of growth. So you know, that question out there, if you can do it and get 4 inches of growth, you've got 18 inches of roots down there. If you can get it to 8, 10, 12, you know, boot stage, then you're down there 40 inches or more. Yes.
Your livestock die and you're grazing a lot, and you graze clear down flat, you're going to plant that day or after, would you let your rye grow longer?
Yes, definitely. The question was if you're a livestock guy and you graze your cover crop off low, go in and plant it. Dan Stelling and his son Matt were at our Whirlwind Expo up there. They do exactly that. They turn the cows out. They take the cows off in the morning, plant it in the afternoon, let the rye grow back to the point where, you know, you need leaf structure for uptake of chemical, and it works just fine for them. But they're under irrigation, so they, you know, you can take that much of it of the cover crop and then afford to grow that much of it back. It's not much of a crush on your soil moisture.